Welcome to the show, Rohan. How's it going?
Hey, welcome. Thank you.
Tell us about yourself, please.
Just
A
say.
man of few words. A man of few words. I love it. But please tell us a little bit about what you do here at AWS.
So I'm a product manager with the Amazon OpenSearch service, and I've been working with the service for quite some time and developing features which will help our customers get better value out of OpenSearch on things like one of the features that we are going to talk about, multi-AZ with standby, which talks about high availability, getting better performance out of your OpenSearch clusters and the likes.
Yeah, we're going to hit a lot of topics today that I think are near and dear to the hearts of architects out there everywhere. We're going to be talking about how many nines of durability and availability and things like that. But before we do that, before we get to the new feature, right, this multi-AZ with standby, I think it might be beneficial just to talk through OpenSearch in general. There's been a lot going on with OpenSearch, and some people may not be familiar with what it is. Do you want to give us just like kind of a high-level overview, Rohan, and tell us maybe, for example, I'm familiar with OpenSearch from the stance of like putting a bunch of operational logs in there and being able to query that, right? That's a pretty common use case, but I know people are doing much more interesting things with it as well. And there's a lot of features out there that, take it beyond just like a log querying store. So you want to take us through kind of an intro on that, Rohan?
Sure. So Amazon OpenSearch service is providing a managed service on top of OpenSearch. OpenSearch is one of the most popular sort of a search engine out there, right? It's open source. It sort of unlocks your real-time search, monitoring, analysis of business and operational data. And it finds its application, like you rightly said, for application monitoring, log analytics, observability, security analytics, and even website search. One of the most common ones that maybe you open an e-commerce site, you have a search bar and you're searching for a product. Most likely behind the scenes, it is talking to an OpenSearch cluster to figure out what's the most relevant search results for them. That's the most easiest and probably the most broadest example. But like you rightly said, a lot of people have found other use cases or use of the service as well, like analyzing logs, identifying patterns from a security analytics perspective, identifying threats or events that could be of interest. And more recently, it has found place in generative AI as well to front end and provide vector DB searches as well.
You said the secret word right
Yeah, I was
there.
gonna say that. That's the
like the
buzzword.
alarm bells need to go off, right? So what are you can't just drop that and then not tell us. What are people doing in the generative AI space with OpenSearch?
So they are using OpenSearch as a vector DB, right?
Oh, cool.
They are converting these files like images, audios, videos into fingerprints or metadata, which is stored into the OpenSearch clusters or OpenSearch domains, and they are then used to augment results from generative AI.
That's very cool. Yeah, I have a background also in document storage back in the day. Worked at a few places that did document storage, and this was like search databases like this were often what we utilized for metadata in general, right? So the metadata about the documents that you're storing in the document store. So sounds kind of similar to this vector database, and I've heard a lot about this as well in the AI world. So that's really interesting. Now, Rohan, we're here to talk about multi-AZ and standby support. And to kind of tee that up, I always love to talk about what the world was like before. So we're here to talk about availability, right? And we measure that in nines. Prior to this launch, what was, how were people achieving, multiple nines of availability in OpenSearch?
So OpenSearch is a distributed system, right? It is sort of built for people to manage their data in a distributed manner across multiple nodes, multiple data sets, which have been split into multiple chunks of data, so that they can search and better use the idea of a distributed system. Now, the problem with a distributed system is a lot of things can go wrong, and especially when they are deployed in the cloud. right? Things go wrong, right? There could be a instance failure, there could be a disk failure, there could be a network switch that has failed, or there could be a power outage. These are all possible scenarios, not just in a self-managed data center, but in a data center like AWS as well, right? And you want to be prepared for something like that, right? So customers would usually sort of create a domain with multiple nodes, assuming that if one node fails, the rest can sort of serve the traffic. They'll keep multiple copies of data. If they are using something like an AWS cloud, they would create a multi-AZ sort of a cluster or a domain where, again, the nodes are distributed across multiple AZs. So if anything happens in one of the AZs, the other AZs can sort of handle this. But they do not do all the things that are required. I mean, OpenSearch is a very complex software. It provides a lot of knobs, and sometimes getting all the knobs correct is very difficult. And sometimes people fail to understand the impact that might be there because one of the things failed, right? There is a change in the usage pattern or the usage of resources across the domain, and this can result in a situation where there is stress on the remaining resources. There is movement of data, there is movement of traffic to the remaining resources, and that increases the utilization. So people don't tend to build enough redundancy into their systems to handle such failure scenarios, and that leads to unavailability, right? So in the world prior to this feature that we are going to talk about, we as a service used to provide 99.9% availability, right? What does that mean is roughly about 40 to 45 minutes of downtime in a month, right? Which could be very critical for businesses, especially, let's say, for example, if it is directly something that your customers interact with, it could mean loss of business, right? And you don't want to be in such a scenario. So you want to be able to get as much availability as possible. When I said 99.9, it's actually about 8 hours to 9 hours of downtime in a year. You can imagine for a large enterprise which is making millions of dollars or hundreds of millions of dollars, that 8 hours loss of business could mean a lot, right? So to improve on that is where we then introduced multi-AZ with standby, which provides 99.99%, which effectively translates to about less than 5 minutes of downtime in a month, which is a vast improvement over what exists today or before the launch of this feature, actually.
I just want to highlight, because for anybody who is not familiar with measuring availability by nines, right? So you said this world of 3 nines, like 99.9, right?
99.9%.
99.99, right? In terms of, and I just heard you give the time, but I want to get it like right next to each other. You said 5 minutes versus 80 hours. Was that what you said, Rohit?
So if you take a month, a
Yeah.
period of a month, right? 5 minutes in a month is 99.99,
Okay.
and 45 minutes in a month is 99.9. Right?
Okay,
That's a 10
perfect.
improvement. Sorry.
Yeah, that's huge, right? That's a massive improvement.
Yeah.
And I know you're going to show us this working, and what I have to do to turn on multi-AZ with standby. How complicated is it? What do I have to go set up? Is it as simple as a click in the console? Is there a little bit more to it? What do you think, Rohin?
Yeah, so one of the goals was, like I said, there are a lot of knobs in OpenSearch, and people need to be aware of all these knobs when they are setting up these multi-AZ with multi-AZ clusters and ensure that they get this high availability. We wanted to make it very simple for customers, right? Like you rightly said, click of a button, a simple choice that makes it very easy for them to sort of get that 99.99 or the 4 nines, right? So we baked it into the solution itself, right? So a lot of these validations, ensuring that you have the right configuration, the redundancy is built in, is already part of the solution. So the standby bit that we were talking about in the multi-AZ with standby is essentially the redundancy that is required in the system to withstand these potential failures, like a node going down or a disk failure, or in a worst case scenario, an entire AZ not being available. So that is what we can probably talk about a bit about that during the demo as well. So that will give more context in terms of what we have implemented and how we have made it easy for customers.
Cool. Is it a good time to bring that up?
Yeah.
What do you think?
Absolutely.
All right, let me bring up your screen. Let's take a look at this actually working, which we love doing here on AWS On Air.
So by default, when you log into the console of Amazon OpenSearch service, it will there is a dashboard which lists all your domains, and it will show the name, the status, etc. of the domain. And in this particular case, you'll see multi-AZ with standby. It's active. It is using the OpenSearch engine, like our service provides both Elasticsearch and OpenSearch engine. So this is the OpenSearch engine, and the version and the status of the cluster. This is green, which is great, and that is what you want always. That is sort of an indicator that your domain is available, right? Now, when you want to create a domain, you essentially click create a domain. This is a new experience that we rolled out with this particular feature. Earlier, it was probably a lot more cumbersome for people to sort of get a handle of what they wanted to create. So in this particular case, you give a domain name, let's say my test domain, and choose a creation method. So this is something that new that we have introduced, which is easy create, and then there is a standard create. Easy create is essentially a lot of defaults that we have pre-selected for you, and you get a very quick, small cluster which can take a production workload if required, right? You do definitely need to size your cluster for the your production workload and the kind of workload that you want, but this gives a very basic domain. And even to test out this feature, this is probably the right configuration to use. And the engine version is already selected. You can choose what kind of a network you want, and you definitely want to set up security. So we have made security sort of mandatory when you are setting up a quick start domain. And then there are a bunch of defaults that we have pre-selected for you, right? We are going to set up a multi-AZ with standby domain. It is going to be 3 AZ. There are certain data types and instances that we have selected, number of data nodes, the throughput IOPS that we have already selected, 100 GB per node, which may not be a lot for a production domain, but good enough to sort of test it. And this also tells you which all features or which all attributes can be edited after the creation of the domain. So this is a very quick and easy way to test out this particular feature and also run some of your initial tests and get a sense of what this would mean, right? But the more interesting bit where I can probably show the kind of nuances that we have built into this particular feature would be something that is visible in the standard create. So if we go to the standard create mode, you sort of then choose the template, right? Are you going to use it for production or are you going to use it for dev test? Those two most common things. We try to make the choice again simpler for people to understand, how they should be thinking about their clusters. If you have a production clusters, then there are certain basic defaults that we would like you to always keep in mind. This ensures that you are getting the SLA that we have promised. If you do a dev test and you make certain choices, you may not get the SLA guarantees that we are providing with the service, right? So under production, then you have the choice, which is the new feature that we are actually building. And that is what I said, we made it very easy. The deployment option is either you create a domain with standby, which is a multi-AZ domain with the standby AZ that we are going to talk about, and the domain without standby. Domain without standby is the world that existed sort of before this feature was released. It doesn't have a standby. It will not put nodes into the standby nodes at all, right? It will function and behave as you always have been using the service. We strongly encourage our customers who are running production workloads to use domain with standby, and you'll see why, right? By default, it is a 3 AZ domain with 2 active, 1 standby AZ. You have a choice of engine options. This particular feature works on OpenSearch 1.3 and above. By default, we always have the latest version on the top, but you can always choose older versions and from 1.3 and above, right? One of the cool things that we did, and this is where this feature and the validations that we have built in will shine, is it sort of creates defaults that you want in most of the scenarios, and then helps you make the right choices. Like, for example, one of the things that we want customers to do, and this is like I was telling earlier, people tend to choose multi-AZ and deploy nodes across these AZs, right? But they tend to forget that the most optimal solution would be to have equal number of nodes in each of the AZs, right? So in this particular case, this is 3. But if you, for example, say 5, it will throw an error telling you this is not a balanced sort of a cluster, and you want equal distribution of your data nodes across the AZs. And if you say like 6, that means each of the AZs will get 2, and this data node picture on the right, which is the table, essentially will show how these nodes will be distributed across the AZ. This is something that makes it very super simple to understand how the multi-AZ deployment works. And along with that, you have the storage and the volume of storage that you need, 100, 1,000, you can choose. And depending upon the instance type, what is the available limit, you will be able to configure the domain. You can choose to enable ultra-warm nodes. Small call out, the ultra-warm nodes by itself are not enabled for standby. It has a slightly different architecture and is not essentially covered by the 99.99, but the usage for a warm and ultra-warm and cold data storage is essentially to keep data that you use less frequently or query less frequently into a sort of a more cost-efficient storage option, right? Like I was saying, some things go with this. We have to enforce certain defaults. So, for example, dedicated master nodes is a must. When choosing multi-AZ with standby, a lot of times people do not realize what important role the master nodes play. They essentially ensure that the cluster state is always maintained, the cluster is always green, everything is healthy and working. If you do not enable dedicated master nodes, that role is then played by the data nodes, which increase the amount of processing or work that the data nodes need to do, and they're playing more than one role, and loss of any one of them could result in the cluster becoming unavailable. So this again brings in that extra layer of protection for your domain.
Yeah, sorry, Rohit, I just want to jump in here for a second. So, as you're talking to customers, as customers are talking to you about this new feature, getting 99.99, how are they deciding, which workloads really need that level of availability, right? Like, what are some of the things that you hear from our customers that they determine, yeah, I really need to have, 4 nines of availability here?
Yeah, like I said, it is a business critical workload. It is part of your main business process. It is something front and center of a transactional system, possibly, where it determines how your business will be. I can take a couple of examples. Let's say there is an e-commerce website. A person will order what they want if they are able to find what they want, right? Let's say you are looking for a particular shoe of a particular color, or you're looking for a particular bag, and they go to the search bar and they want to search, and the right results are not coming out, right? Because your search engine, which is behind the scenes processing the data, is not up and running, right? Which means they will walk away, they'll drop their transaction, they'll sort of abandon their cart and move on, right? They might go to another website and do that. So that is one case. The other case, like we talk about, is where people are dependent on this data to make business decisions. They want to be able to search, let's say, for example, their operational logs, etc., which is critical to ensure that their business is up and running. They are matching or using transactions, storing transactions, and they are doing, let's say, order matching or something using the OpenSearch engine. And if the OpenSearch engine is down, right, the service is down, they are not able to match orders, and then essentially things fail, transactions fail, it leads to loss of business. So yeah, those are the kind of use cases where customers should really think about this particular option for their workloads.
James, I saw you come off mute. Are you gonna jump in there?
No.
Okay.
Well, after late in a minute.
Okay. I was gonna tee you up too, Rohin. A lot of people, when considering availability, durability, etc., like architectural choices when they're building out a workload in AWS, oftentimes availability also means cost, right? And I don't know if now is the time that you're going to get to it, but I definitely want us to cover how does cost impact, or how does the multi-AZ with standby impact your cost in terms of running OpenSearch?
Like I said in the beginning, right, what would people tend to do, or what people used to do before this feature was available, and what was expected of them when they sized their domain? Usually people will say, okay, this is the kind of workload that I'm going to run on the service. Based on this, what is the kind of query throughput that I need? What is the indexing throughput that I need? How many concurrent queries would I want to run? And they'll size their cluster. They'll say, okay, I need 3 nodes, 6 nodes, 2 copies of data, 4 copies of data, whatever that number might be, right? And they'll configure their clusters. Sometimes they tend to forget that, this is a system where you are assuming that everything is running well, everything is sort of static, or your traffic is going to be constant, it is not going to change, it is not going to linearly increase or exponentially increase depending on the time of the year or the season or events. And you expect the configuration that you've chosen to be always available and the cluster always working, right? But that's not always going to be the case, right? So we expect customers to, when they configure their clusters, to also think about these kind of failure scenarios and how would you want your application to react, right? One of the things that multi-AZ with standby essentially does is it not only provides you high availability, but it also ensures that your performance remains consistent before and after the event, right? Let's say a node failure happens, you had a certain performance before the node failure happens, and when we switch over to the standby, right, the standby becomes active, and one of the affected nodes in one of the active AZs goes down, you are essentially moving your traffic to the rest of the available AZs, right? And the standby which has now become active. Your performance remains consistent. This is something that people tend to not think about when they are configuring their clusters, and they tend to undersize their clusters. And for those customers, right, when they undersize, there is a potential that when they move to multi-AZ with standby, they are now going to start thinking about what this standby means, right? In certain scenarios, it might mean that they need to keep additional copies of data. So let's say you had only 2 copies of data and now you need 3, because one of the things that we mandate as part of the solution is you have at least 1 copy of the data in each of the 3 AZs. And when you think of multiple copies of data, you keep them in multiples of 3 so that each AZ has equal number of data. This is what ensures consistent performance. So to add those additional copies of data, they might see an increase in their storage cost, but they also may see an increase in their node cost because they now need to provision those nodes which they haven't because of the redundancy. But a lot of our customers also ensure that their cluster follows all the best practices that we have been advocating for so many years of running the service, right? They do keep 3 copies of data. They do keep 3 AZs. They do keep dedicated masters. They ensure that the resource usage is not beyond a reasonable limit, because as I was speaking earlier, if a failure happens, it tends to put the stress on the remaining clusters. So you want enough headroom so that if any of those issues happen, you are able to sort of have room for that. So
Right.
in this particular case, clusters which are well configured, or customers who have taken care of all the best practices, it's almost like a no-brainer. If you have 99.9, why not just move to multi-AZ with standby? You are not going to be charged extra. The feature, to enable the feature by itself, there is no extra cost. You are not necessarily going to have to provision extra nodes or extra copies, and there's no additional cost in that, right? And you get that higher availability, you get that higher guarantee from us. So yeah, those are the 2 sort of possibilities that might exist. In one case, there is an impact because they had not thought of redundancy in the way that they need to. In the other case, they have, and they should leverage this and get that higher availability guarantee from us, because we do
Right.
better monitoring and recovery from failures automatically.
I love it.
Yeah, I was gonna say, so as with a lot of AWS services, the service itself doesn't really cost anything extra. It's always the underlying infrastructure and services.
Resources,
So,
infrastructure.
yeah. So if you've already got, like you said, if you've already got it kind of set up, it's nothing. It's nothing extra, really.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
I gotta let you know, Rohin, you're getting a lot of love from chat too. You're getting some nice sessions, an amazing session too. So keep it up. Keep it up.
And I was going to say, I love 2 things I got from what Rowan said. One, I love the term he used, knobs. I'm going to start using that. That's a great way to kind of break down like features and different radio buttons and stuff we have in there. I'm going to start using that. And also highlighting going from 99.9 to 99.99 in terms of like actual time. Like whenever I try to explain to people the difference between, in their mind, it's 1,000th of a percent. Like that's nothing.
Right.
That doesn't seem like a lot. But then when you think about it, and like my parents can't get on, some website for 3 minutes, they freak out. And I explained to them, yeah, and that's with 99.999, and so that 1,000% ends up being pretty
I mean, our
significant.
attention span has reduced considerably. Today, if your video doesn't load in a few seconds, you might
Yep.
as well move away and try and load another video.
Yeah.
That same goes with everything else as well. If this is front and center of your business application and people are not getting the results that they want, they'll move away. They'll go to another website and start searching for the product that they want to buy or the transaction that they want to do. So, yeah, it affects business directly. So you should be careful
Absolutely.
about it and plan for it.
Yeah.
Every minute counts.
Yeah. And I can imagine if AM went down for a minute, and everyone turned away, he'd probably be he'd probably be devastated.
Yeah. Well, and I would have already said like 8 other things that you would have missed during that minute.
Yeah, right.
Yeah. So one last thing, Rohan. I know I want to give you the chance to finish the demo if I know I interrupted, but I wanted to talk through some of these things. Is there anything else here that you wanted to show the audience?
Certainly. So one of the things that often comes up, right? How do I know that there is a standby? How do I know the standby is working? So one of the things that we have done is added additional metrics that you can look at when you're looking at multi-AZ with standby. So when you open your domain's detail page, for example, you'll see this is a 3AZ domain with standby. This is something that I had a ready demo cluster. And then if you go to the cluster health page, right? Sorry, this is my bad.
Yeah, no worries. It happens to the best of us.
Yeah. So give me a second, I'll be back.
Okay. Yeah, I'll take your screen down for a moment to let you go log back in. So just to tee you up for what I'm gonna ask you near the end, Rohan, as you log in. Go ahead and keep working. A lot of people may not realize that OpenSearch is open source, actually. So I definitely want to, before we wrap up, talk about how the managed OpenSearch service, when you add features to that, how that impacts the open source version of OpenSearch. So maybe we can wrap up
That's
with
a great
that.
question. Yeah,
Okay,
that's
cool.
a great question and something that we are very proud of. We've been around for more than 8 years. The service was launched in 2015, and we have been running hundreds and thousands of domains with Elasticsearch and now OpenSearch, and we have learned a lot, right? And this is a culmination of all those learnings over a long period of time, and we wanted the open source community to benefit from it. So there have been a lot of contributions that we have added for this into the open source project. When we refer to the open source world, we call it the OpenSearch project, and we have contributed a lot to that. Like, for example, you have the ability to decommission zones. There's an attribute called the zone awareness attribute that is used to decide, how do you want to move away the traffic. You don't want traffic to go to the impacted AZ. You want it to go to the standby AZ. So there is a weight distribution that is allocated in the beginning, which can be changed when such an event happens. So all the building blocks or the foundation required to build a service like this is already out there in the open source. We are very proud of that. And it's all available. People can go look at it, find this, and they can build the automation around it. So what we have essentially done as part of the managed service is bring that automation on to this particular feature, right? So yeah.
Great, awesome. I don't know if you we do have to wrap here just in a second.
Yeah.
It looks like you got things pulled up. We can take a look at that metric that you were talking about for the standby. How do I tell when I have a standby, right? Like, let's
so if you look at this, there is an easy rotation metric. So what we do is we every 30 minutes rotate the AZ, which is in standby. So like in the beginning, we said we have 3 AZs. One of the AZs is maintained as standby. So if an event occurs, the standby becomes promoted to an active, and the AZ which is impacted goes into recovery and then becomes the standby. But we want to ensure that the system is always up and running and the standby system works. So we rotate the AZ which is in standby every 30 minutes. This also ensures that your search caches, etc., are well maintained and your query latencies do not necessarily get impacted when these events happen. So this particular one shows how this AZ rotation is happening, right? So you can see 110 in this particular case around the AZ. So it shows that 1A is currently active, 1D is active, 1C is at 0, which is essentially mean it is less standby. If I go another 30 minutes down, you'll see now 1A is 0, which means now 1A is in standby. So if and when an event happens, let's say a node failures happen, you will see a line somewhere in between like this possibly, which is not coinciding with the rotation possibly. And you will see which of the AZs has gone from being standby to active, and the active AZ has become standby. So this particular metrics essentially gives that picture and that confidence that the solution is always working. And you can see the change in terms of the AZ, and you will not see impact on your performance metrics as well. Like we have called out in our documentation, blogs, etc. The impact, if any, is the time it requires to failover, which in most cases is less than a few seconds. But we have a maximum impact of probably a minute. But you can imagine a minute is much better than 40 minutes of downtime at any given point in time.
Yeah. All right. Unfortunately, Rohan, we've got to move to our next segment, but go check out this new multi-AZ with standby feature in OpenSearch. Go check out the OpenSearch project too. Open source, available with the features added back right to the open source version, as Rohan eloquently told us. Thank you for joining us on the show today, Rohan, and hopefully you'll be back.
Thank you. Thank you for having me.
Yeah, of course. We'll see you next time.